We've got Rangers, we've got Islanders, we've got a must-win game for both teams, and we've got a very special crossover edition with Gil Martin from Locked On New York Islanders.
You're Locked On the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1256 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, and we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So yeah, doing a very special pregame crossover edition with Mr. Gil Martin from Locked On New York Islanders. We'll be talking about everything Rangers and Islanders, doing predictions for this game, talking about the ongoing playoff chase and whether either team can possibly hope to get in. Going to be talking a little bit about the trade deadline, and also going to be saying a few words about the late, great Al Trautwig. Enjoy. All right, and so with no further ado, let's go ahead and kick off this very special crossover edition of Locked On New York Rangers and Locked On New York Islanders. This is John Chick with Locked On New York Rangers, joined by my good friend Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders. And Gil, obviously, two teams here that, for the most part, if we're being honest, have fallen short of expectations so far this season. Right now, both on the outside of the playoff picture looking in, Rangers just slightly ahead above the Islanders in the standings. But what are you seeing from the Islanders recently? They've lost 3 in a row coming into this, including 4-3 to the Stars coming out of the break here. What are you seeing from them? And is there any hope of them turning things around and potentially at least making a run at it here as far as the playoffs are concerned?
I mean, hope, yes. Realistic hope? Well, maybe not as much. I mean, the problem isn't how far out of the last wild card spot they are. They're 4 or 5 points out. The problem is how many teams you have to pass and stay ahead of. I mean, realistically speaking, I think the Sabres are the only team in the Eastern Conference that are really completely not making it. And even they're not that far behind everybody else. I mean, the Islanders are like 5 points out of the wild card and 6 points ahead of the Sabres for, 16th place. So the problem is you're probably going to need to get like 2/3 of all the available points to even have a chance to make the playoffs. And this Islanders team just hasn't shown the consistency throughout the season to be able to do that for another 25 or so games. It just hasn't. Yeah, they've gone on a couple of winning streaks, but they always follow that up with a losing streak. They had a 7-game winning streak just before the break. Then they lost 2 in a row. Now they lost their first game after the break. So they're in the muddy middle. That's just where this Islanders team is. And I just don't know how realistic it is to expect them to stay hot that long, especially when you also take into consideration all the injuries they're dealing with.
Yeah, you hit on something that I think is very, very accurate there. Just the fact that there's so many teams also jumbled together. You've got 6, 7, 8 teams for basically 2 spots here in the Eastern Conference, to the point where it feels like if you lose 2 straight games at this point, it might be a death sentence because somebody's going to win. One of these other teams is going to win, and it's just really going to hurt you if you're trying to squeak in here. But
and then you have the dreaded 3-point game. So you could have a situation where both teams that you're fighting for playoff spots get a point or 2, and that's even worse. So, yeah, it makes it harder to make up the points.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say who the other Eastern Conference teams are going to root for in this game between the Rangers and the Islanders, but one thing they're rooting against is for this game to go into overtime because, to your point, there's the dreaded 3-point game, for everybody else. But I did want to ask you about this. Islanders have made the playoffs the last 2 years. Might not happen this year. I feel like both of our coaches, I don't know, certainly Laviolette, I feel like the seat is at least getting warm. Do you sense that the same could also be said for Patrick Waugh? I know he just got there basically, but it is a little bit of a step back, and we know how short the shelf life can be for NHL coaches. Just your thoughts on where everything stands with Waugh, and would you like to see him back next season?
See, here's the thing about Waugh. If Lou Lamoriello remains the GM, I think his seat is pretty safe. But if Lou Lamoriello retires or the ownership of the Islanders decides to go in a different direction and you get a new GM, that GM may want to bring in his own coach. and have his own guy. Or the possibility does exist that Patrick Waugh becomes the new GM, and then he has to hire his own coach. I mean, he has no NHL GM experience, but he did own, coach, and he was the GM of a team in, junior hockey. So I don't think his seat is all that hot unless the GM changes.
That makes sense. And something else I wanted to ask you about the Islanders. I feel like it's something that we've talked about basically on and off ever since we've both been doing this podcast over the years here. But, one of the biggest issues for me, and I don't see as much Islander hockey as you do, Gil, but for me, just looking at the Islander team kind of as an outsider, like they just don't seem to have enough offensive firepower. And that's true again this season. I was looking at the stats earlier today, and I knew they were kind of near the bottom as far as like goals scored, but I checked it today, 6th to last in the NHL in goals scored. I mean, at what point does this get addressed? Like, I know you can't just like wave a magic wand and, make your team score more goals, but I mean, you got to figure like in the offseason or maybe at the deadline, if they look to buy, I don't know if they're going to do that, but I mean, at a certain point, you got to get some guys that have a little more, offensive oomph, do you not?
You do, and this team hasn't had that for, a very long time. I mean, I've been doing the podcast since, 2019, which is, I think, right around when you started doing the podcast, and the Islanders have been ranked near, in the bottom third of the league in goals scored, I think, every season since I started doing the podcast. And it's not like they don't have some guys who could put the puck in the net. Anders Lee has had a 40-goal season. Brock Nelson has had a bunch of 30-goal seasons. Kyle Palmieri scored 30, but there's no sniper. There's no bona fide 40, 50 goal. Oh my gosh, the other team has to account for this guy every time he's out on the ice kind of a player. And if you think about it too, if your most dynamic offensive player is Matthew Barzal when he's healthy, he's a setup guy. He is not a shooter. So you need to get him that finisher. You need the Brett Hull to his Adam Oates, and they don't have it.
Yeah, makes sense. And former Ranger, now obviously with the Islanders, somebody that I must ask you about. I'm sure, Ranger fans are going to be interested in this player. That is Tony DeAngelo, out of the league for the start of the season, ends up coming back over, joins the Islanders mid-season. How has it gone so far, and what do you think is going to be the short-term future with DeAngelo? Because I could see where, maybe they keep him around, but by that same token, if they sell at the deadline, he is only on a 1-year deal. Do they try to flip him somewhere? Just your thoughts on DeAngelo, how he's done, and what the future holds for him.
Well, I think he's done well. I mean, the bigger concern about DeAngelo was, the off the ice and in the locker room stuff. Will he get along with his teammates? Will he not cause controversy away from the rink? So far, it's been all quiet, and that's a good thing. On the ice, he's got a goal and 5 points in 9 games. He's a +3. He's a good passer. He's probably better as the quarterback of the power play than Noah Dobson, who, by the way, may be back for the game on Tuesday night. He is eligible to come off of LTIR, but we don't know whether or not he's actually going to be activated. But I think right now we've seen good things from Tony DeAngelo, and he's only signed through the rest of this season. If Dobson comes back and is healthy and playing well, could they try to flip him? Maybe. But it wouldn't also shock me if he continues to play well, that they offer him another contract.
Yeah, definitely seems possible. Definitely a lot of different ways that could go. And actually, the Islanders have a couple of impending UFAs, so there's going to be some interesting decisions. I figure we'll save that until a little bit later. We'll talk about the trade deadline near the end of this show. But in just a second, everybody stick around. Gil's going to ask me some questions about the Rangers and everything that's going on with them, and we'll do that and a whole bunch of other stuff in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers and Locked On Islanders is brought to you by Indeed. You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday? How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy, just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your posts seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. We've all been in that spot where we need to hire somebody like yesterday. The pressure's on, and every day without the right person is a setback. That's exactly when Indeed's sponsored jobs come in handy. They make sure your post is seen by the right candidates right now. Now you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, Indeed, is all you need. All right, we'll go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers and Locked On New York Islanders. And Gil, the floor is yours. Fire away. What do you want to know about what's going on with the Rangers?
Well, let's start with an injury update. I know there's been a few guys who have been banged up. Who do you expect will and will not be available for the game tonight?
It's hard to say for sure. I mean, Kreider in the last game was kind of a last-minute healthy scratch. He was actually on the ice during, warm-ups and taking rushes and whatnot, and then obviously sat out that game with an upper body injury. It's one of those things where I think right now, anytime a Ranger, especially a veteran player, is pulled out of the lineup for literally any reason, everybody's eyebrows go up for a second, thinking that, oh man, there's about to be a trade. And I don't think that's what's happening here. I think the injury obviously is legit. He's had something of a back injury pretty much off and on the entire season. I think it's also affected his play, at least to some degree. But it's kind of a toss-up because it's kind of just been this way all season where the back issue flares up, it goes away, it flares up, it goes away. Obviously he played in a couple of games in the Four Nations there, played in the first game against Buffalo and then sat against Pittsburgh. So that one's kind of a toss-up. And as far as Igor is concerned, if there's ever a good time to get injured, I mean, there's not, but if ever there is, he timed it perfectly because he was going to be out for 1 to 2 weeks right at the start of the Four Nations, which was exactly 2 weeks. And he had a miserable game against Buffalo, got yanked in the first period, and then was absolutely brilliant against Pittsburgh. So I would imagine he'll probably be back out there. I get the feeling. I mean, you could give Quick a start, but, given where the Rangers are in the standings and how huge every point is going to be and how big Igor is going to be to this team if they actually can get in, I would expect him to be back between the pipes for this game against the Islanders.
I guess my biggest overall question for you is, how did we get here? Because last year, the Rangers are the President's Trophy winning team. I'm not going to say people thought they repeat as President's Trophy winners, but I think people thought they'd be in the equation. How did this team implode the way they did?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, and there's a lot of reasons for it. I think that, to begin with, the offseason with Chris Drury and, his handling of the Barclay Goodrow situation, his handling of Jacob Trouba, where, they're going to trade him, and then they kind of backpedal and get cold feet about it, and then they trade him anyway. There's all that, but then there's just the fact that when you look at this team up and down the roster, and it's hard to really put your finger on exactly why this has happened, but basically every single player has regressed, at least to some extent. The only player that I look at on this entire roster and think, okay, he's a better player this year than last year is Will Cooley. And Will Cooley was a rookie last year. It's his second year, so you would expect that to happen. He's stepped up. I think he's become a better player this season. But beyond that, yeah, I mean, everybody has taken a step back. Lafreniere signs his new contract and he disappears. Artemi Panarin, the points are there, but he's not dominating games the way that he did last year. And everybody's favorite targets, Mika Zibanejad and Chris Kreider, they've taken a step back this season too. There's games where they just don't look engaged. They don't look dialed in. It's just wild to watch. I mean, yeah, to your point, Gil, I don't think, even me as a Ranger fan, I didn't think they'd win the President's Trophy 2 straight years, but they were going to be a great team. They return largely the same roster. So there's really no reason to think that they'd take such a massive step back and that we would be in this situation that we're in now where they're on the outside of the playoff picture looking in. I mean, I thought they'd at least make the playoffs pretty comfortably. And if they do get in, I mean, it's going to come down to the last game or two of the season, you would have to think.
So if almost everyone on the team regressed, how much of that is on the coach?
At least some of it. I've been kind of, as far as where the blame goes, you could point the finger in a lot of different directions for everything that's gone on this season. I start with the players because they're the ones out there playing the games. And I think there's been too many times this season where they've no-showed games. They've just kind of felt sorry for themselves, whatever the situation might be. After that, I would say Chris Drury. He's had his ups and downs as Ranger GM, but I think the last year and a half has maybe been the shakiest portion of his tenure as Ranger GM. And I'd put Laviolette last, but that's not to say that Laviolette is blameless, because at a certain point, you got to find a way to push the right buttons. You got to get these guys, playing hard, playing quality high up to their abilities. And he has not been able to do that. So I don't like the idea of the Rangers constantly changing head coaches like every 6 months, which is what it feels like they do. And for a team that was 2 wins away from the Cup final last year and had the best record in the NHL, like, that doesn't sound like a coach that should be fired in the next season. And I realize they've regressed, but at a certain point, man, you got to dig in and just say, this is our coach. We're going forward with this guy, and the players have to figure it out. And that's kind of where I'm at with Peter Laviolette. I'd like to see him finish the season, just see where things stand when it's all said and done here, and then kind of reevaluate and then make a decision going into next season. Is he the guy or not? Because what I don't want to happen for sure is they get like 6 or 7 games in the next season and then they fire him. Like, right. I can't. I hate when teams do that. Have some conviction. Either he's our guy or he's not. Come to that decision in the offseason. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
And what about Drury? Is his seat hot right now?
I don't think it really is, somewhat surprisingly, because Dolan seems to like him. And I think he's done enough good things, a lot of which he tends not to get a whole lot of credit for. There was a trade deadline when they were, the upstart team a few years ago, where he brings in 4 players. Among them, Frank Vetrano, Andrew Kopp. Everybody he brought in fit like a glove. I thought they really keyed that deep playoff run that the Rangers had. Some of you in the depth guys that he's brought in recent seasons have done a nice job. Somebody even like a Jimmy Vesey is certainly not a superstar player, but you go out and you find this guy that's an undervalued player, and he gets into the lineup and does a good job on the fourth line. Jonathan Quick a couple of years ago, everybody left him for dead. He's been phenomenal. There's not a better backup goalie in hockey. So just a couple of examples here. But I think with Drury, like I said, a lot of ups and downs. He's had a lot of big-time hits. He's had some swings and misses too. And I think more of the swings and misses have been in recent history. So I get the feeling Drury will probably get at least one more season here. He just made the big JT Miller trade. That, to me, is a trade that's geared more toward next season than this one. But, yeah, I mean, I do think, like, if they miss the playoffs this year, miss it next year, yeah, I think at that point he's probably gone.
You mentioned JT Miller. That was my next question. How has he fit in his second go-around with the team? And why do you think that trade is more for next year than for this year?
Yeah, so far so good. He's somebody that comes in and just plays with a certain amount of edge and a certain amount of, for lack of a better term, bleep you. That's one of the newer hockey terms that's out there recently. They needed somebody like that. They needed somebody that, goes out there, competes with a chip on his shoulder, plays with a lot of fire, a lot of energy, because there's a lot of players on this team that have, frankly, been lacking that this season. The reason I think it's for next year more so than this year, I feel like what the Rangers are doing, and it's kind of ongoing right now even as we speak, they are retooling this team more than they are rebuilding it. A few years ago when the letter went out, 5-6 years ago, however long it's been, that was a full-on, full-fledged tear-down rebuild. What I think they're doing now is they're tinkering with the roster a little bit. They like their young core. They like some of the young players that are in place. They're going to go forward with those guys. Clearly, they're going to go forward with guys like JT Miller, Vincent Trocheck. Obviously, Igor Shesterkin's going to be here for a long time. I think they feel that they can kind of rebuild around these guys quickly, retool, if you will, and kind of do what we've seen the Capitals and Devils both do this season, because they were not good teams last year. Devils missed the playoffs. Caps barely got in, got swept by the Rangers. And look at them now. They've obviously done quite the 180. So I feel like that's kind of the plan here. And that's the idea with Miller. Obviously, you bring him in, you'd like to make the playoffs this season. But I think more than anything, that's moved geared more toward next year than this one.
How have the Rangers felt about playing at UBS Arena? It's been there now a couple of years. Obviously, the Coliseum used to be so loud with both Islander fans and Ranger fans in attendance. What have your impressions been of the atmosphere at UBS and how the Rangers sort of handle that?
Yeah, I think it's kind of on par. I haven't noticed anything like dramatically different. I mean, I guess maybe, there's a little bit more permanence with this arena, and maybe the Islanders feel like they have a little bit more of a home ice advantage than they did in the past. But, I think for the most part, it's going to be what it always is. There's going to be some Islander fans. There's going to be some Ranger fans. It's going to go back and forth. They're going to try to drown each other out when they're chanting something and boo each other and whatnot. And, hopefully everybody behaves themselves. But, Rangers, Islanders, whether it's UBS Arena, Madison Square Garden, the outdoor game last year, the moon. It doesn't matter. It's Rangers Islanders, and certainly there's going to be a spirited atmosphere there. There's going to be fans of both teams, and it's always a good time.
Yeah, always is, and always look forward to it. Always. I mean, that's why I wrote the book. I mean, absolutely.
So we will keep everything rolling in just a second here. Gil and I are going to shift our attention to the trade deadline. We are going to make some predictions for this game. And I'm also going to say a few words quick about late Al Trautwig, who very sadly passed away a little bit earlier today as we're recording this episode. So we will do all that in just a second. All right, so continuing right along on this very special crossover edition of Locked On New York Rangers and Locked On New York Islanders. And Gil, I mentioned this just a second ago, but obviously some very sad news in the world of New York sports. A little bit earlier today, reported that Al Trautwig had passed away. And Gil, I know that you mentioned, because we talked about this for a quick second before we hit record, and you mentioned that you met Al Trautwig a couple of times. So I'm just wondering, man, I unfortunately was never able to, but what was that experience like? What were your impressions of Al when you got to meet him?
Yeah, nice guy, thoughtful guy, knew his stuff backwards and forwards, and just great to talk hockey with him. I can't say I spent a lot of time with him, but I did meet him a few times, and always gracious, and just one of those people where you just got the feeling like if I had a chance to sit down in a bar with him, we could talk hockey for days. I mean, it was just that kind of thing. And when he was broadcasting, and he did so many of those, he hosted so many of those retrospective shows where they would do like the Rangers, the Vault series, and he was so good on that. He just made you feel like you were a friend and you were just talking hockey with him, and how great it was to just kind of kick back and reminisce and just talk about the sport that we love. So very sad to hear about his passing, way too young, and a real institution, especially here in the New York area.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, obviously. Like you said, way too young to be gone, and somebody that, for me, when I first started watching Ranger hockey, he was one of the guys. It was Sam Rosen, John Davidson, Al Trautwig. And of course, there were other analysts who came and went, and there were some guys in the studio and whatnot. But for me, they were like the big three, and Trautwig just made it fun. He had kind of like that dry sense of humor.
Yes.
But he made it fun, and he just always cool, calm, and collected, seemed to have a really good rapport with the players. And one of the more lasting images for me is, the 1994 Cup, because that's right when I'm starting to watch, hockey, Ranger hockey. And he's in the locker room interviewing everybody. And I mean, he's loving every second of it because they're celebrating winning a Stanley Cup. And you got Adam Graves there with the bottle of champagne pouring on his head while he's interviewing him. That was fantastic. I was going on YouTube watching some old commercials. There was like an MSG commercial where he's going to interview Michael Jordan, but then like literal bulls, like from the running of the Bulls, I guess, come running down the tunnel instead. And he's like, which one was Jordan? It's like so cheesy, but so funny at the same time,
Yeah. I mean, that's how he was. He can make you laugh. And when you think about it, you're like, man, that's stupid. But you laugh because just the way he presented it. And you knew he knew how the joke was kind of corny, but he was enjoying every minute of it. So you enjoyed it.
Yeah, he played it perfectly. He was definitely in on the joke too, for sure.
Absolutely.
But, I think safe to say, Gil, speaking for both of us here, but certainly both big fans of his. And obviously our heart goes out to anybody, his friends, his family, fans of the Rangers, fans of the Islanders, anybody that just enjoyed his work. Because, we definitely lost a good one a little bit earlier here today. So with that, always a little bit of a difficult transition here. But I did want to ask you, Gil, a little bit about the trade deadline coming up. I mentioned earlier in the episode that obviously the Islanders, they've got some impending UFAs. Brock Nelson among them, lifelong Islander, 33 years old. Cal Palmieri is 34. There's some other ones as well, but they're kind of the two big names. Do you trade these guys before the deadline if you're the GM? Do you try to get a deal done with Brock Nelson to make him an Islander for life? I mean, just what is the approach and what would you like to see them do?
Well, those are two different things. I mean, unfortunately, look, I am a big Brock Nelson fan. He has meant a lot to this franchise. He has done a lot for this franchise. And any time that I've interviewed him, he's been great. The thing is this, though, and I think you hit the nail on the head. He's 33 years old. He will never have a higher value if you trade him than he will right now. The supply and demand for centers at the trade deadline, not a great supply. A lot of teams looking for that second or third line center who could score and add a little depth for the playoff run. If he goes to free agency, he could sign, a 4 or 5 year deal easy because of the bidding and the market, and teams will bend over backwards to compete with each other to, get him to sign on the dotted line. The Islanders at this point, and it's a mantra I've had on my show, they need to get younger, faster, and more skilled. He's 33. He's not going to make this team younger. To me, I would trade him. I would trade Kyle Palmieri. The Islanders' prospect pool is ranked 27th by The Athletic, and that's up from 32nd last year. So, Lou traded away 4 straight first-round draft picks in a row. To me, it just makes sense. And quite honestly, you could trade him at the deadline, and if you really want to bring him back, you could sign him again over the summer. But this, to me, is an opportunity for the Islanders to really retool on the fly, which you alluded to, concerning the Rangers. The problem is Lou Lamoriello doesn't believe in retooling. So if the Islanders are, let's say, within even 6 or 7 points of a playoff spot at the deadline, I'm concerned he may buy, or that he'll sign a Brock Nelson to a 3 or 4 year extension where you're just going to see diminishing returns, a higher cap hit, and the team is not going to get younger, faster, or more skilled. So what I think he should do and what I think he's going to do, not the same thing.
I gotcha. And for the Rangers, I mean, like I said, the retooling basically continues here. I think you're looking at a situation where, and it could depend what they do. They got 5 more games before the trade deadline. So, if they go 5-0, maybe that changes things, but I don't think they're going to do that based on how they've played recently. But I think that, 3 guys that I would move at least 2 of them. They're all impending UFAs: Jimmy Vesey, Riley Smith, Ryan Lindgren. I don't think there's really any chance that any of them is re-signed by the Rangers in the offseason. Lindgren, man, he's gone out there and he's battled for years and he's been a good player, but he's having a tough season. And I think his style of play is already really beginning to take a toll on him, which probably explains why the Rangers only went to a 1-year extension with him this past offseason. Vesey, you're only going to get so much. And Riley Smith, he's been okay, but it hasn't really worked out, I think, the way that the Rangers thought that it would. And I think if you're the Rangers, you want to open up the door for some young players, Brett Berard, Brent Hoffman. Hoffman actually just got called up a little bit earlier today, so we might see him against the Islanders. I would definitely be looking forward to that. But I think sooner or later you want that. I talked about how this team is kind of in a funk and guys are like half asleep out there. You want that shot of energy. You want those young players that come up and they're hungry. Brett Berard gave the Rangers a little bit of that earlier this season. So I think you're seeing a situation where it makes sense to trade at least the impending UFAs, get a couple of draft picks in return, and open up the door for the young kids.
Makes sense. I wish that Lou Lamoriello would be thinking the same way, but unfortunately, there aren't any young kids ready to step in, really, from the Islanders system right now. Their best prospects are 2-3 years away.
Yeah, makes sense. So anybody on the Islanders, rather, that has kind of impressed you a little bit recently that maybe isn't like a household name like some of the players that we've already talked about, somebody that maybe us Ranger fans should keep our eye on in this game tomorrow night?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Mark Gatcomb. He's a 4th-line guy, but you'll notice, he's probably going to be in the lineup again. He may only play 8 minutes, but he'll have like 6 hits in 8 minutes, and he's really good on the forecheck. You talked about youthful enthusiasm. He's 25, but this is his first go-round in the NHL, and the enthusiasm and the energy that he brings is contagious. So, is he a earth-shattering guy on the 4th line? No, but does he give the 4th line a nice bit of juice that it's been lacking all year? Absolutely. And in an Islanders-Rangers game where there's a little more physicality maybe than most, he may be involved in that a little bit as well.
That makes sense.
How about for you?
I would probably say, if you want to go for like a real deep cut, I could throw another 4th liner out there. That would be Sam Carrick. Before the break, he actually got on a little bit of a heater there. That 4th line was really playing well. They haven't stood out so much in these 2 games following the break. But Carrick's one of those guys, man. Like, there's obviously limited upside in terms of offense and whatnot, but just one of those guys that goes out there and does his job every single game. He's a cheat code when it comes to faceoffs. He wins like every faceoff that he takes. He'll kill some penalties and whatnot, and he'll give you an honest effort. And but if I'm gonna go with like just one player, I'm gonna make it Will Cooley, somebody that, again, second season here. Talked about him earlier, where he's one of the few guys that has stepped up this year versus what he did last season. And I just feel like, Rangers Islanders, that's kind of right up his alley as well. It could be a physical game, a hard-hitting game, and he's right at home there. I mean, he came up last year as a rookie and played with a bunch of physicality, and now he's becoming more of a well-rounded player. Added some offense this year. Hasn't been scoring as much recently, but got one against Pittsburgh. And, sometimes I think you get that one goal. It can kind of be a little bit of an avalanche effect, and you get rolling again, and especially with a young player. So I think Will Cooley will have a strong game tomorrow and maybe even put one in the net.
All right. Should be interesting. Yeah.
But one more thing, I figure we might as well go ahead and throw out some predictions for this game. Gil, do you have like a final score or anything, somebody that's going to score a goal for the Islanders, anything that's going to happen there?
I'm picking Islanders 3, Rangers 2 in overtime. Simon Holmstrom, the game winner.
Okay. I'm going to go 2-1 Rangers, also in overtime. I'm going to go JT Miller with the game winner. I feel like this could be a little bit of a slog early because the Islanders kind of play low event hockey in the first place, and the Rangers have been half asleep at the start of games. So I think that kind of lends itself to a little bit of a slow start. Now, of course, I'll say all this, and the final score will be 6-5. But I mean, that's kind of how I see it going. And I think gradually we'll see the intensity pick up, and these teams will kind of remember, like, oh, right, we're in a playoff chase here. We got to win this game. So that's kind of how I see it going, but we'll see.
Should be fun. Always is.
Absolutely. So for myself, for Gil Martin, thank you guys, as always, for tuning in. And, we will see you next time.